Okay, well, we are going to get started. For those of you here, welcome. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your busy day to learn about school libraries in Minnesota. My name is Anna Granias. I'm a research scientist at Wilder Research in St. Paul, and I've been working at Wilder in research and evaluation for about 10 years. I'm also joined today by Ashley Dress. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ashley Dress, and I'm the Sales Librarian for School Media Centers at the Southeast Library System, which is one of the 7 multi-county multi-type library systems in the state.
Awesome. So I want to highlight a few housekeeping items before we get started. So for the next 40 minutes or so, we will be presenting a lot of information. We have time at the end to answer questions. If you have questions that pop up during our presentation, we absolutely encourage you to put them in the chat, or you can save them for sharing at the end. We'll do our best to answer them during our Q&A during the last 20 minutes or so. Our goal today is that you leave this webinar feeling informed, equipped with information that will assist with advocacy efforts, and have any questions you have answered. We also recognize that an hour is not a lot of time and welcome you to follow up with us after this session with any additional questions that we didn't get to. And please note this webinar is being recorded so that those who are unable to attend have access to the information shared. So we're going to be covering some background, some information about the methods of this census, key findings, some critical insights and recommendations, and then the Q&A, as I mentioned. A full report, including an executive summary, as well as 7 infographics for the multi-county multi-type library system regions are available online, and I will link that in the chat in a moment. And with that, I will hand it over to Ashley to start us out with some background information.
Thanks, Anna. So I just want to take a moment to remind everyone about the value of school libraries. I know we have a lot of school librarians here today, and you already know this and are living it. But if you're using this information for advocacy purposes, it's important to ground those who may not understand in their value. Research consistently shows that strong school library programs staffed by qualified librarians correlate with improved student achievement, particularly in reading and information literacy. Libraries also serve crucial functions beyond just housing books. They're often centers for collaboration, technology access, and developing research skills. There's also evidence that school libraries help to address educational inequities and are very much in alignment with the state's efforts to increase student literacy. However, school libraries are chronically under-resourced and understaffed. I'm sure a lot of you recognize that. We know that improved literacy is a goal in our state, hence the READ Act, a statewide effort to improve early literacy, particularly for students in kindergarten through 3rd grade. And when it comes to literacy, school libraries not only provide essential resources like books and technology, but also offer personalized support, encourage reading for pleasure, and contribute to a positive learning environment, all of which are crucial for improving students' literacy outcomes. We heard from many of you who registered for this webinar that you'd like to learn about how to use this data to advocate for support for school libraries, and that's a big part of our intent today. The Minnesota Multi-County Multi-Type Library Systems work to improve services and facilitate cooperation among the various library types in 7 regions across the state. Directors and staff from the MCMT worked closely with County Opinions and Wilder to collect the census data and develop the executive summary and final report, the results of which we're bringing you today. And so the 7 regions you can see there on the map are Arrowhead Library System, Central Minnesota Libraries Exchange, MetroNet, Northern Lights Library Network, Prairie Lands Library Exchange, Southeast Library System, and Traverse des Sioux Library System. The census was conducted in spring of 2024 by County Opinions and included all eligible K-12 public and charter schools across the state. The findings from the census provide a variety of invested parties, such as yourselves, legislators, school administrators, school library staff, and families with information about the support schools and media center staff currently have and need to preserve and strengthen school library programs. So who answered the survey? Respondents were largely school staff who manage the library media center. Most are licensed media specialists, teachers, or paraprofessionals. There was a high participation in the census with 1,528 out of 1,777 schools responding, which is a really high number for a survey with no incentive attached to it. The survey was about 65 questions, so pretty lengthy, and information about criteria for eligibility can be found in the overall report. But you can go to the next one, Annie. And I'll pass it back to Anna now to talk about the results a bit more. Oops, you're muted.
Thank you. So overall, we saw a pretty good distribution across school types and classifications. So the majority of responses came from independent and special school districts. Over half came from elementary schools across the state. And all of this information is in the larger report too, if you really want to take some time and look at who the respondents were. There was good representation from greater Minnesota and some of the lesser populated areas of Minnesota as well. You can see 54% were from urban population size. And responses were received from across all 7 multi-county multi-type library system regions, with the largest proportion from MetroNet in the Twin Cities 7-county metro. So overall, good representation across the board, across the state. And what I'm presenting today is really statewide findings, so the state in aggregate. But the infographics that we have available go more to a regional level. So there are a few definitions that might be helpful. You'll hear me refer to LMCs, which are library media centers, and there is a statutory definition that you can look up, and LMSs, which are licensed media specialists. So you might hear the word media specialist used colloquially, but when we're referring to a licensed media specialist in this context, it means someone who has specific state certification. So we checked, the certification was checked among survey respondents. So we're specifically talking about that group when we refer to them. And Minnesota Statutes 2023 section 124D 911 is the statutory definition of a school library media center. And one of those defining factors is having a licensed media specialist or licensed school librarian managing the center. So what did we learn? So this, the next figure is an average Minnesota schools library media center. Now these are averages, they're medians. So please understand that there is a wide range of realities here that exist across schools in Minnesota, but this is kind of the middle numbers. So you can see in terms of students served, an average library media center serves 432 students. There are about 24 books per student. In terms of paid staff and staff time, there's an average of 40 hours. And this is across all staff serving the library media center, regardless of FTE status. An average LMC has 1, maybe 2 staff members. The average budget is $5,000 for the school year, and that comes to about $10.99 per pupil. And in terms of collections, an average sized collection is 11,000 books, and the average age is about 17 years old. So these numbers might not mean much to you at this point, so we'll dig into some specifics next. So 81% of schools in Minnesota reported they have a library media center, or what I'll refer to as an LMC. 5% said they don't have one, and for 14% of schools, we just don't know. However, it's probably more likely that they don't have one, given the nature of the survey request, even though schools without a media center were encouraged to respond to this survey, the census. It's important to note that respondents weren't given a clear definition of what a media center is per state statute. So this 81% may be less if respondents had been provided a really concrete definition. Among schools with an LMC, 15% share the LMC with another school. So this includes schools that share a building. So that's a little lay of the land in terms of schools having or not having an LMC in their building. So one point we really want to hit home today, and Annie, you can go to the next slide, is that staffing is not adequate for many LMCs. The census aimed to understand how many schools have a media center that is served by a licensed media specialist. And this is a person that holds a license issued by the Professional Educator Licensing Board, or PELSB, not just someone who is maybe colloquially referred to as a media specialist. And state statute now requires that all LMCs be served by an LMS to technically be considered an LMC. So if we actually used the state statute definition, only about 46% rather than 81% would be considered having an LMC due to this requirement in state statute. If not served by a licensed media specialist, school libraries are most often managed by a teacher without a media license, or even more often a paraprofessional. And school library aid is being provided by the state to support schools to fund these positions, given that it is newly part of state statute. So there's currently a discrepancy here between state statute and actual staffing practices in schools and districts. Here, let's take a closer look at that. So let me orient you to this chart. The first column shows whether a school has full-time, part-time, or no licensed media specialist staff. And the middle column shows staff without a media license. So most important here is that 44% only have staff without a media license. And you'll see in the note below that an additional 2% are simply run by volunteers or aren't staffed by anyone. Then I want to draw your attention to the 6% at the bottom. So according to the American Association of School Libraries, every school library should ideally be staffed by a full-time licensed media specialist and a full-time support staff, a highly trained technical and clerical support staff, and up from there, kind of depending on the school size and needs. So according to this kind of higher standard, put out by a national association, only 6% of Minnesota schools have the recommended staffing level for an LMC. So not only are we pretty far from meeting requirements in state statute, we're extremely far from the standards that are recommended by the AASL. Among schools that reported having a licensed media specialist employed in the LMC, more than half, or 53%, were staffed at less than full-time. So 37.5 hours per week is what we defined as full-time. Respondents shared what they think are the most common reasons for a lack of media specialists in their school. And the responses that rose to the top are that it was a district or school staffing decision, lack of funding, or inability to find a qualified LMS candidate. And here's a quote that exemplifies the staffing challenges that some schools are experiencing. I'll just give you a second to read that. So 25% of respondents, regardless of whether they have a media license or not, reported that they are working in more than one school. But please note that this includes those that may work at two schools within one building. So it's not necessarily that they're traveling a lot, but could be. So we found from this data that many LMSs split their time across more than one school. Of those who are working in more than one school, about half are working in two media centers. But you can see here that nearly 1 in 5 are serving 5 or more media centers. So in general, library media centers benefit from having district oversight. So we asked about this, whether or not they have district oversight. A district level person that provides oversight can provide leadership for building level media specialists and support staff. They can serve as the licensed library media educator for building level library media centers. They can provide support services to library media centers in the district. And they can also support budget and finances. But almost half of schools don't have this oversight from their district. And transitioning to accessibility for kids. So ideally, library media centers are open for students during the entire school day and before and after school hours. But the data from the census show that over half of schools don't have that sort of accessibility. So we asked, what are LMC staff spending their time on? Ideally, the person managing the media center is doing library-related administrative work, providing instruction for students, and are also doing things like providing professional development for staff, such as in-service sessions and advising on student needs. And they're collaborating with teachers to design and assess curriculum. But according to the data, this maybe isn't happening on the scale that one would hope. So here we can see respondents were asked to report the proportion of time they spend on each of these tasks you see listed here. So the percentages you're seeing here are averages or means of the proportions reported by all respondents who answered the question. That's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but do your best. You can see that the percentages for collaborating with teachers and providing professional development are pretty small, especially compared to this other category at the bottom. The most common tasks respondents perform outside of the list provided and which were placed in the other category are things like technology support, digital tech integration, device management, clerical tasks, teaching, subbing, supporting other school activities or programs, like study hall or lunch, and other duties as assigned. So this may be an indication that those running the media center don't have enough time or capacity to do all the aspects of their job, or that they are not expected to be doing these kinds of things in their role because they lack the training. For example, you wouldn't expect a paraprofessional to provide professional development to teachers or staff. But this is an essential component of having an effective school library program. And for those who responded that they provide instruction to students as part of their role, they were asked what content they teach. And ideally, these numbers would all be at 100% or close to it. But given that many LMCs are not staffed by licensed professionals or are understaffed with fewer hours, a smaller number of staff, it makes sense that these numbers don't reach 100%. It's possible that with better staffing and protected time and value from administration in these areas, these numbers might be higher. Respondents were asked to rank their top 3 challenges. And this analysis combines responses and reports the percentages of respondents that selected each option as one of their top 3. And the largest proportion of respondents, 67%, selected budget and funding sources as one of their top challenges. So one could interpret this as validation that the current school library aid that's being provided by the state to schools is certainly a value. The other challenges leading in order is collection development and maintenance. More staff persons or hours are needed. Administration's value of the library or library media specialists. Duties assigned that are unrelated to the library, conditions of facilities and furnishings. And a stark one for me is that 42% of respondents identified duties assigned that are unrelated to the library as one of the top 3 greatest challenges. And that may be in part because many of these media centers are staffed by paraprofessionals that are expected to do many other things outside of their role in the library. And in addition to selecting a set of choices of top challenges, respondents were invited to share additional comments about what is challenging in their job. And the largest proportion really reiterated the need for more staff or hours to carry out the duties of their job, noting that they're often pulled into other duties unrelated to the library. And find the library budget inadequate to do their work effectively. Many also noted challenges related to staff positions or hours being cut. And besides challenges, respondents were asked to select their top priorities. Their top priority, their second priority, and their third. And this analysis combines responses and reports, again, the percentage of respondents that selected each option as one of their top 3 priorities. And about 3/4 noted an increase in the library materials budget as a top priority, a much higher proportion than the other options listed. Other most common priorities were related to specific staffing needs, like increasing paid hours or full-time employment for staff to complete tasks like weeding, admin time, checking out books, having a full-time licensed media specialist at each school rather than splitting one's time, and keeping current licensed staff, so not cutting staff. So we're hearing some themes coming out of the data across many different questions that were asked in the census. So we also asked, there were also questions asked about collections, and as mentioned earlier, the median collection size across respondents was 11,000 books and approximately 24 books per pupil. However, the number of books per pupil varies greatly across schools. Regardless of the number of books in a school library, it's imperative that collections are curated to maintain relevance, improve access, maximize space, and enhance quality. So we had noted them being 17 years old on average. So some schools have a much older collection even than that. Remember, that is the middle number, 17 years old. And if we think about how much has happened over the past few decades, it's easy to understand why it's important to have updated collections as possible. Another item on the census was about decision making. Respondents were asked to assign proportions related to who makes the decision about how LMCs are staffed and funded. So this came out to be, it's 60% of the district, followed by 30% of the school principal. And then the extra 10% was other decision makers. And open-end responses provided a little more nuance, indicating that districts often make overall funding decisions and school principals decide how to distribute those funds within the school. But again, these are all averages. The census also asked about LMC budgets. Budget categories included funding from the district, from the school, fundraising, PTA, PTO, book fair, school library aid, and other sources. Other responses most often included funding from grants and donations. Respondents were asked to exclude budget spent on salaries or benefits, furniture, and printing. So there's some limitations to the amount of detail we can report on these data due to data quality, but we did look at the distributions of total budget amounts. More than half of schools with an LMC budget of less than 5,000, and this is supposed to include the state school library aid. And again, the median amount per student is $10.99. And for context, an average book costs in between $10.15 to $32.22, depending on the audience. Okay, so most schools spend the majority of their LMC budget on books and materials. The way we reported this was constrained a bit by the way the survey question was asked. So respondents were asked to report the proportion of their budget that they spend on these various components. So reported here are averages of those reported proportions. Another one that's tough to wrap your head around, but for example, 75% of respondents reported that they spend none of their budget on makerspace or tech for student use. Alternatively, 86% reported that they spend 50 to 100% of their budget on books and materials. So that's kind of how you read these numbers. So in 2023, school districts and charter schools, and I mentioned this earlier, they were eligible to receive an automatic distribution of state aid calculated at the greater of $16.11 per adjusted pupil unit, or APU, for the current year, or $40,000 for school districts and $20,000 for charter schools. Schools did not need to apply for the funding. It was distributed by the Minnesota Department of Education as part of the entire aid package to districts and schools. And the funding is ongoing. While we don't have any data to suggest that schools misused these funds, if the intention of this legislation was to build up and strengthen existing programs or start new ones, we have some data to suggest that the funds were not always used to that end. So you would expect that those running the media centers, kind of on the ground, doing the work, would be aware of this funding and feel the impact, right? Well, the respondents were asked whether they were aware of the funds received by their school. Of all respondents, 40% said they were unaware that these funds existed. Of those who said they were aware of the funds, nearly half, 49%, reported they were unaware of the impact of those funds on the school library. So they knew that the funds had come from the state, but they were unaware of how those funds had benefited the media center. So you can see here, when asked about the impact on the school, 49% said they were unaware of an impact on the school library, as I mentioned. And the next highest percentage, 24%, said it was used to maintain staffing levels from the previous year, which is totally allowed. So in open-ended responses, some shared that they felt the funds had been used to supplant funds that were then used elsewhere within the schools, not necessarily to strengthen the media center, but maybe only to preserve what is already there, which according to the current statute is a perfectly acceptable use of the funds. We don't have any data that suggests how often funds were supplanted in this way. But of those who knew how the funds impacted the media center, the largest proportion did report that it was used to maintain the previous year's staffing levels. And if the intention of the legislation was to strengthen and build up public school library programs, it might be missing the mark. Now, when we presented these data to the Education Finance Committee in the Senate, we did hear testimony about some great, amazing things that have been done and accomplished with the state aid that was provided to support school libraries. So there are, many different stories related to this state aid that can be shared. The census just provides one part of it. And so I will pass it back to Ashley to go over some of the critical insights and some uses for advocacy moving forward.
Thanks, Anna. So results from the census indicate that school libraries are struggling and need support by adequately staffing library media centers and equipping them with the resources necessary to update and expand their collections. Minnesota can improve access to the knowledge, tools, and literacy students need to succeed. Buy-in from state, district, and school leaders on the value of school libraries is critical to equipping them with the proper resources and ensuring they realize the full benefits of aid provided by the state. So just a few insights. There is more work to be done to ensure all schools have a library media center. There's a lot of reasons why schools may not have a media center, but research consistently shows that students need access to a well-resourced, well-staffed library. And I think the school library community needs additional stakeholders to be included to help carry this message for the community. Laura mentioned we should talk about what's happening with school library aid, and I do include that here. So updating the state statute regarding the use of school library aid, that's happening right now in the legislature. Both the House and Senate have put forward bills restricting its use to only the salaries and benefits of a school library media specialist, electronic and material resources, or furniture, equipment, or supplies. And noting, I guess, that that was in salaries and benefits were in the first iteration in 2023, but those could always include media aids as well beyond the media specialist. So any salaries and benefits of those working in the school library media center. The governor recommends reducing the school library aid program by 7.5 million in fiscal years 26 and 27, and 15 million in fiscal years 28 and 29. And the House would cut 44.96 million in the 26-27 biennium and more than 47 million in the 28-29 biennium. Of course, the session isn't over yet, but that's so that's where they are right now, and I guess the debate will continue. School districts should hire licensed media specialists and support staff, support teachers and other staff in seeking licensure, and increase overall capacity of LMCs. Each school and library needs at least one licensed library media specialist. Their time needs to be protected so that they're able to serve the media center effectively. Support staff need to be trained on library values, including like student privacy, and both media specialists and support staff need their hours increased in the media center. More schools across Minnesota would benefit from district level staff supporting the work of licensed media specialists. We know that staff or that support can administer a district vision, advocate for equitable resources around the district, and lead the implementation of national school library standards. Students and teachers will be better equipped for academic and instructional success with the support of a licensed media specialist. Without that person in that role, students and teachers lose access to reading support, information literacy skills, support of research projects, digital learning, and the integration of technology into curriculum. And schools need resources to curate their collections to meet the needs of students, and a licensed media specialist to ensure this is done in a way that carries the greatest educational value. More funds are needed to support collection development to improve the age of materials across the state, and students and teachers need to be made aware of the free online resources provided to all Minnesotans through Minitex. So we kind of created a couple of advocacy slides. I know there's some non-school library folks on here, people that are non-library people too. And these are kind of just good tips for probably being a civically engaged resident of your community, but specifically for libraries, knowing who is running your school library. If it's a media specialist, paraprofessional, how can you support them and kind of activate the community to support the library? And know your elected officials and who's running for your school board, and find out more about their support for school libraries. I think just in general, being more aware of what the school board is doing, and if there's times of year that might be better to kind of engage in conversations around this topic too. And for the school library folks, I know this is I think it's hard to ask, I guess, school librarians to continue to advocate on behalf of themselves. I think they've been having to do that a long time. And so I think there's multiple things that are needing to be happening, both at the state level, but I guess thinking at the local school level, are there actions to take that can help kind of nudge your school in a better direction, right? Can you use this data, especially if you maybe download the region specific infographics from the Wilder website? Where is your school budget in relation to those, into the region or the rest of the state? What's your average collection age? And is there a way that to engage, with the community, maybe beyond the administrator, to talk about, we really need to, is there a way we can get this a couple years younger, right? Thinking about that slide that Anna showed about what you spend your time on and what content is taught, like she said, it would have been great if all of those were at 100%. So thinking if there's ways to be given more time, a couple more hours or whatever, to be able to spend some time on that content. And then thinking about that staffing scale, where you may be and where your school might be in that. Obviously that 6% is difficult, but to get to the standard that ASL wants, but, is there a way to get more hours for a paraprofessional to be in the space with you as a media specialist? So I want to say that, like, give you the information right to move forward and do what you can for your space, also while realizing that this is a huge issue that is going to take, I guess, a whole community to really solve. And I think you can contact Anna or I with any questions about this.